Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karava Vahaye Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahaye. Om Shanti 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 Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Tato Jayamudirayet. Good. Welcome back. We continue our study of this present section or excerpt from the Aranyaka Parva, where the Vyadha, the butcher, is giving a lecture to the pious Brahmana, and a lecture about self-control. And just to recap the last class very briefly, it was really about materialism. And just a quick comment. If you think of materialism as being a modern problem, think again. There was materialism in ancient times as well. Although maybe the focus was different. In modern times, the focus is on a big house and a stock portfolio or something. In ancient times, the focus was probably more on gold, on cattle, cows. How many cows do you have? But same thing, materialism. So the main point that was being made in the lecture was the problem of the so-called slippery slope. And what that means is the overindulgence in material things leads to more overindulgence. Which means if you only satisfy your needs, you're okay. But when you go beyond satisfying your needs and satisfy your many wants and desires over and above satisfying your needs, you then fall into this category we described as overindulgence, and it leads to this spiraling effect. You just want more and more and more and more, and you come sliding down that so-called slippery slope. We talked about that at some length in the last class, so I won't talk further about it today. Just to recall a metaphor we used in the last class, I also referred to it in a meditation session today, and that is we compared it to the effect. Actually, maybe we'll come back to that. I think we'll come back to that. I think that's enough of an introduction. So what we're going to see today, first in the first couple of verses, I may move through these verses more quickly today because the subject matter, I think, lends itself. The first topic we'll see is the consequences of having fallen down the slippery slope. What that means is when you continue to overindulge, when you continue to satisfy not just your needs, but all of your many desires, you desire more and you desire more and you desire more. Pretty soon, you can no longer satisfy your desires through purely dharmic means. This is a slippery slope. Early on, no problem. Early on, you can satisfy your desires through dharmic means. But when your desires grow so huge, so overwhelming, at some point it becomes impossible to satisfy those many needs, many desires through dharmic means. And then what happens? Adharma is resorted to for the sake of fulfilling those many, many desires. And adharma leads to further adharma, and that's where we pick up the thread. What are the consequences when your many desires can no longer be fulfilled through dharmic means, and you have no choice but to resort to adharmic means? Then what is the consequence? We will see that. Adharmas trividhas tasya, adharmas trividhas, vardhate raga doshataha, vardhate raga, papam chintayate chapi, papam chintayate, braviti chakaroti cha, braviti chakaroti. So adharmaha is trividaha tasya. Tasya, for that person who can no longer fulfill their many desires through dharmic means, for that person, adharma is trividha, three kinds, three aspects of that adharma. And that threefold adharma, which we'll see in the second half of this verse, that threefold adharma, vardhate, grows. If dharma grows, you're in good shape. If adharma grows, watch out. So adharma vardhate, it grows, it increases day by day. Why? Raga doshataha, due to the dosha of raga, due to the defect of raga, attachment and desire. By the way, my translation is wrong. Due to raga and dvesha, I read dosha as dvesha. Dosha is not dvesha. So the translation is wrong. Due to raga, due to the defect of raga. So what is this three kinds of dharma that go on increasing due to these ever-growing desires? And desires, remember that point. Desires go on growing. Remember the metaphor of the fire. You go on putting wood in the fire. That fire is never satisfied with the amount of wood you put in. That fire always demands more fuel. In the same way, the overindulgence of our desires leads our desires to multiply. That's the problem. Therefore, vardhate. Therefore, adharma grows. Raga doshataha, due to the power of attachment. And what is this threefold adharma he's describing? The Vyadha, the butcher. Remember, this is not an ordinary butcher. This is somehow interesting, an enlightened butcher. Can you imagine if you go to the market, and you won't go to see a butcher, I don't think, but you're talking to someone behind the counter. Imagine. They might be enlightened. By the way, how do you know? They might be. You have no way of knowing. Anyway, this particular Vyadha, butcher, was indeed enlightened, and he observes that this dharma, this adharma that grows is of three kinds. What is the first kind? Papam chintayate. First of all, chintayate, one thinks about papam. You think about committing sin. Papa means sin. First you think about it. Then what is the second step? Braviti. Then you talk about it. And what is the third step? Karoti cha. And finally you do it. These are kind of obvious. First you think about doing something wrong. Then you talk about it. You talk about it to your accomplice, whoever that may be. And then finally, karoti, you engage in that adharmic behavior. Why? You are helplessly driven. Helplessly. When your desires are so overwhelming, it's no longer a matter of choice. The hungry person who goes into a store and shoplifts a loaf of bread, are they doing that out of choice? Or because they're absolutely driven to do so? It's not a matter of choice. So we're talking about a person who has gone so far down this slippery slope. If you're at the top of the slippery slope, you still have choice. But once you've come this far down the slippery slope, it's no longer a matter of choice. You are driven by your desire, raga, to commit a dharma sin. Then what happens? Tasya dharma pravrittasya, tasya dharma pravrit, guna nashyanti sadhavaha, guna nashyanti sadhava, ekashilasya mitratvam, ekashilasya bhajante papa karminaha, bhajante papa. Tasya, for that person who is adharma pravrittasya, who is compelled to perform acts of adharma. Pravritta, compelled. That person, you could say inclined is a fine translation, but I think in context, a person who is compelled to perform acts of adharma by the intensity of their desires. What happens to that person? We discussed in the last class. Their sadhavaha gunaha, their good qualities, nashyanti, get destroyed. Obviously, when you're committed to a life of sin, whatever good qualities, the good qualities you started life with, those good qualities get destroyed through this life of adharma. That metaphor I avoided talking about before, we'll introduce it right now. These terrorists who are coming up in the Middle East and elsewhere, they start off as ordinary little children, right? Absolutely wonderful, cute little kids. They could look like your kids. Then how do these cute, good-hearted, pure-souled little kids, how do these kids turn into terrorists? Well, we said there are two factors. One is the propaganda they're programmed with. We're going to come back to that, by the way. The propaganda they're programmed with poisons their minds. And then what? They engage in acts of terrorism. And in that way, whatever innocence and purity they had earlier in life, it is all destroyed. In the same way, for the person who is compelled by desire to commit acts of adharma, their sadhavaha gunaha, their good qualities, nashyanti, get destroyed. Not only that, ekashilaha papakarminaha mitratvam bhajate. Mitratvam bhajate, bhajante. You form a friendship. That person who is slipping down that slippery slope, they form new friendships. What kind of friendships? Ekashilaha. They form friendships with people who have the same qualities. Isn't that generally true in life? Your best friends are people that you have a lot in common with. That's generally true. Your closest friends are those with whom you have the most in common. Many of you coming from India, chances are your best friends are also from India. Not surprising, because you have the most in common with them. So suppose you have fallen so far down this slippery slope, you are engaged in all kinds of acts of adharma. You're lying and cheating and stealing and all of this stuff. Then what kind of people would you choose as your friends? Those who lie and steal and cheat. Exactly. So, ekashilaha, those who have the same nature as you, papa karminaha, those who commit sins, mitratvam bhajante, you gain friendship with such people. And this is also a very powerful observation, because you all know the power of satsanga, the power of association with spiritually minded people. That's a good definition of satsanga. Association with spiritually minded people. You know what a tremendous positive effect that has upon you in your life. You've seen it in your life. You've seen it in the lives of others. Well, just as satsanga has a very powerful effect, its opposite would also have a powerful effect. The opposite of satsanga is dussanga. Dussanga is as powerful as satsanga, but in the opposite direction if the association with spiritually minded people can lift you up. The association with the other kind of people. Puja Swami Dayananda was fond of saying 2 kinds of people in the world, the wise and the otherwise. So satsanga is association with the wise ones, and dussanga is association with the otherwise. And that kind of association will pull you down. This is what the person is subject to. Leading to, this is the last verse that talks about the consequence of falling down the slippery slope. Satena sukham apnoti, satena sukham paratra chavihanyate, paratra chavihan, papatma bhavati hyevam, papatma bhavati. Dharma labham tu me shranu, dharma labham tu me. Good. First 3 lines conclude this section. Saha, that person who has fallen down that slippery slope, tena, because of resorting to adharma for the sake of fulfilling their ever multiplying desires, what happens to that person? Asukham apnoti. The opposite of sukha is asukha or dukkha. Means the same thing. That person suffers. That person suffers as a result of their performance of adharmic acts. A very basic principle of life is what? If you are miserable, if you perform acts of adharma, you will become more miserable. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. And if you're happy, if you're not miserable, and you perform acts of adharma, you will end up miserable. So what is the moral of the story? If you want a miserable life, commit acts of adharma. Contrary-wise, if you want to avoid that miserable life, avoid acts of adharma. Very, very simple, obvious principle. So, satena asukham apnoti, the person who is compelled to perform acts of adharma to fulfill their ever-multiplying desires, they not only suffer in this life, asukham apnoti, paratracha, and in the next life, vahanyate. They are destroyed, which means you suffer the consequences of your wrong actions not only in this life, you suffer the consequences in your later lives as well. Papatma bhavatihi evam. This is a concluding statement. Evam, thus, he, indeed. Breaking apart those 2 words. Thus, indeed, in this manner, papatma bhavati, the person becomes a papatma. Here the word atma kind of has a more general sense of soul or heart. In fact, papatma, an evil-hearted person, a sinful person, a sinner. This is a person who has slipped way down that slippery slope. Now, fortunately, the chapter doesn't end here, because we would certainly like to know how to avoid slipping down that slope. And please note that that it's really such a good metaphor. Because if you imagine yourself tumbling down, you know that once you've built up some speed, some momentum, you know it's absolutely impossible to restrain yourself from going further. It's really a powerful, good metaphor. And that's the problem this person has suffered from. Once they've gone so far down that slippery slope, there's no way of restraining themselves from going all the way down to the bottom. And what is the bottom? Papatma bhavati. The person becomes a sinner and therefore suffers in this life and in the next. By the way, not only do they suffer, they make a lot of other people suffer as well. Terrible consequence. What is the solution? Think of that slope. Once you got some momentum going, There's no way, so the only way to avoid the problem of a slippery slope is to stop yourself when and where at the very beginning, at the top of the slope, before you've started to build up momentum slipping down. And that's what the Vyadha is going to describe next. He says, Dharma labham tu, but now, me shanu, listen to me. Listen to me now, he's addressing the Brahmana, listen to me now, Dharma Labham, about how you can acquire Dharma, about how you can follow a life of Dharma, how you can avoid a life of Adharma, how you can avoid tumbling down that slippery slope. He begins to explain. Indriyan yeva tat sarvam, Indriyan yeva tat Yat swarga naraka vubhao Yat sarva Nigrahita visrishtani Swargaya narakaya cha If it's okay, I'd like to return to that quote from the Bhagavad Gita. Most of you were here last week, where we quoted 2 verses from the Bhagavad Gita, which is kind of restated in this chapter. Remember, the Bhagavad Gita is also a chapter of the Mahabharata. Comes later in the epic. But these 2 verses describe the slippery slope so vividly. I'd like to return to them now so that we can see the meaning will be more clear. How does that slippery slope work? These 2 verses are from chapter 2 in the Bhagavad Gita, verses 62 and 63. These are powerful, very, very potent verses. And let's just see the meaning of them very quickly. Dhyayataha vishayan pumsaha. Pumsaha, for a person who is dhyayataha, reflecting upon vishayan, objects, things that might be of interest. What happens to that person? The first step of a slippery slope, sangaha teshu upajayate. To those objects he reflected on, sangaha, attachment, upajayate, attachment arises. What is attachment? Attachment we've defined very carefully as emotional dependence. That is important for my well-being. That's a statement of attachment, sangaha. So notice attachment, and let's put the stages up here. So the first step, the term comes here, dhyayataha, dhyayataha, due to reflection. How about, can we just say observation? Literally, it means mental reflection. It's a little complicated statement. Through observing the desirable object. Observing means every time you turn on the TV, you get all of these commercials. Or as we said in a meditation session, you go in a mall and you see all these wonderful displays. So first step is you observe all of these desirable objects. And obviously you observe them with your senses, indriyas. And that's the connection to our present verse. We'll come back to it. So we'll come back to this. Indriya means senses, sense organs, like sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. We'll come back to that, but let's see the slope. First step is observation. Second step, sangha, attachment. Attachment means what? I need that to be happy. Emotional dependence. My well-being is dependent on that. Sangaha, teshu to those objects. Sangaha, upajayate, attachment arises. Then what? Sangat, due to this attachment, what comes next? Sanjayate, kama, desire. Look, this is so brilliant. Kama, desire. Look at the pattern. First you see it, then you think, first you see it, then you conclude, that is necessary for my well-being. That's sangha, that's attachment. And having concluded it's necessary for your well-being, what comes next? I want it. Obviously, kama, desire. I want it. Then what? Kamat krodaha abhijayate. Then from kama comes krodha, anger. Why? I want it and I can't get it. It's not available, I don't have enough money, I don't have resources, it's not accessible to me. So therefore, krodha upajayate. The next verse, krodhat bhavati sammohaha. From this krodha comes sammoha. Fifth step. Sammoha will translate as delusion. You stop thinking properly. You stop thinking clearly. Your thinking is starting to be perverted by the strength of the kama and krodha. By the way, you all know how krodha, when you experience anger, just to see this connection right here, when you experience anger, do you think more clearly or less clearly? How obvious is that? Oh my gosh, how powerful anger is in distorting our thinking and judgment. That distortion in thinking and judgment is called sammoha. And then from sammoha comes this next part, which is almost always mistranslated. Smriti vibhramaha. So the vibhrama, the loss of smriti, almost always is translated as forgetfulness. Does that sound like a good translation in this context? So first you want it, then you get angry, then your thinking gets disturbed, and then you develop amnesia. Forgetfulness is a terrible translation. In another context, maybe, every translation has to be contextually correct. So what is lost here due to anger distorting your thinking? What gets lost? Vibhrama means loss. But what gets lost? Values. That's what's getting lost. And the reason smriti is used is your values are remembered. Indeed, they're like samskaras. They're in your memory bank, so to speak. So smriti vibhrama, even though it means literally loss of memory, it really suggests the loss of values. And that loss of values comes why? Desire caused anger. Anger distorted your thinking. And your distorted thinking is followed by, naturally, loss of values. Smriti vibhramaha. Smriti bhramshat buddhi nashaha. From the smriti vibhrama comes buddhi nasha. Destruction of your buddhi. Now again, get the right translation. It means your intellect is meant, buddhi means intellect, your intellect is supposed to keep you on a track of dharma. That's what it's designed for. That's why Ishvara gave you your intellect to make choices which are helpful for you. In fact, even Professor Darwin would agree with that definition. You have evolved an intellect to make decisions which are helpful for your survival, according to Professor Darwin. Helpful for your survival. Is following dharma helpful for your survival? Yes. Is following adharma helpful for your survival? No. So this is what it means. Buddhi nasha will say perversion of intellect. Nasha means destruction in this context, perversion. And why did I use the word perversion? The intellect which should keep you on the track of dharma, because it's for your own best interest, that same buddhi is pulling you off the track of dharma, getting you in trouble. And what is the last step of the slippery slope? Buddhi nashat pranashyati. Pranashyati, you are destroyed. In this chapter we saw papatma bhavati, you become a sinner, you become engaged in a life of a dharma, and that's the final step in this sequence as well. You end up destroyed, your life is destroyed. Why? As soon as you are living a life, committing acts of a dharma, guaranteed, your life is destroyed. Okay, this is the slippery slope. It comes out, we saw this in brief in the current chapter, but in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, in these two verses, it is so absolutely clear. Now, where can you arrest yourself? If you're slipping down the slope, where can you stop? So once your intellect has been perverted, any way to avoid acts of adharma? Too late. So then, suppose if once you have loss of values, any way to prevent this? Once your values are lost, your buddhi is guided by your values. If your values are lost, what is there to guide your buddhi correctly? Nothing. So if your values are lost, this next step is inevitable. So then, what should we do? We should avoid getting deluded. Because if you can avoid this delusion, then you can avoid the loss of values. But if you get angry, is there any way to avoid this delusion? We all know how anger distorts our thinking. If you get angry, your thinking is going to be distorted. Nothing, you can say, oh, I'm really angry now, but I have to think clearly. Not possible. It's not possible. So therefore, you better not get angry, but then if you have desires, do you think you'll always be able to fulfill your desires? In fact, guaranteed, you won't always be able to fulfill your desires. Therefore, as long as you have desire, you're going to have anger. Then how to avoid desire? Oh, you shouldn't be attached to anything. Which means you shouldn't look upon anyone or anything as important for your well-being. Do you think you can pull that off? Do you think you can walk through the mall and see all that cool stuff, and you can just say to yourself, thank goodness, none of that is important to me. None of that will improve my life. You won't feel like that. So notice, once you get started on this slippery slope, you just keep building up momentum. You go faster and faster and faster. It becomes harder and harder to restrain yourself. Presumably, if you have a lot of will, if you're a very strong, willful person, I think it is indeed possible to catch yourself at other points. But in general, once you build up momentum, what do they call it? It's a one-way street. You're just going to be lost. So, according to this analysis, what is the best place to catch yourself? This is a teaching of the Bhagavad Gita and of this chapter of the Mahabharata. They come to the same conclusion, and that is to control the senses. Indriya means senses. To control the senses first. Now, what does it mean to control the senses? If walking through the mall is going to lead to this attachment, and then to the desire, then to the anger and all of this, then what is the solution? Don't go to the mall. This is what the Bhagavad Gita teaches us. This is what the Mahabharata teaches us. If you are subject, notice the language now. If you are vulnerable to all of this, notice that statement. If you are vulnerable to all of this, then what should you do? Avoid it. If you're not vulnerable to it, go spend as much time in a mall as you want. I don't care. You won't see me there. But if you are vulnerable to being drawn down this slippery slope, wouldn't it be wise to avoid going to that mall in the first place? That is what Sri Krishna taught in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's the same thing that the Vyadha is teaching here. Let's get back to where we left off. So here, this is a verse we came to. So he teaches here. He teaches, Indriyani eva tat sarvam yat swarga narakau ubhau. We have to break the words properly. It says, Indriyani, your sense organs, sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. He says, tat sarvam, they are everything. They are powerful. They are powerful in what way? Yat swarga narakau ubhau. They can lead you to swarga, heaven. They can lead you to naraka, to hell. Your senses are so strong, they can lead you to either way. So this is that first step. Indriyas, dealing with the very first of the 8 steps of our slippery slope. If you expose yourself to all of those goodies, and if you are vulnerable to being drawn down the slippery slope, you've made a big mistake. If you are vulnerable, what should you do? Step 1, restrain your senses, indriyas. If the indriyas are left free, they can drag you down. And drag you how far down? According to the Vyadha, they can drag you to hell. On the other hand, if the senses are restrained, they can lead you, according to Vyadha, even to heaven. The metaphor that we're going to see a little bit later. The metaphor, the traditional metaphor is, and we're going to see this metaphor in 2 more verses, but just to give you a sneak preview, the senses have always been compared to the horses that pull a chariot. And what's interesting about these horses, have you ever ridden a horse? I don't know. I remember as a kid, I think I rode a horse. If you're riding a horse, how do you get the horse to turn? You can't, there's no directional signal like in your car. And if you tell your horse, turn left, I don't think the horse is going to understand or pay attention to you. But, you're holding on to these reins. If you want to go left, if you pull gently on the left rein, that rein is connected to his head, and what it does is it pulls the horse's head. That's all it does, right? You pull the rein, it pulls the horse's head, and of course once the head is going in this direction, the body can't continue going in this direction. If the head is going this way, the body will follow suit. Whatever direction the head is pointed, the body follows suit. Doesn't that sound like a pretty good metaphor? Wherever our attention is placed. By the way, that's a really good definition for dhyayataha, attention. Dhyana, it comes from dhyana, so attention. Wherever your attention lies. I translated observation. I think attention is a much better definition right here. Wherever your attention lies, your life will follow suit. Whatever direction the horse's head is pointed, the horse's body and the chariot it pulls will follow suit. In the same way, wherever your attention lies, your life will follow suit. If your attention is only on the stuff in the mall, what do you expect your life to do? Your life will follow suit. On the other hand, if your attention is elsewhere, for example, this morning, where is your attention? Not on the mall. Your attention is here in this class, and your life will follow suit. So this is a point. He says, Indriyani eva tat sarvam. Your senses are powerful. Yat swarga narakau bhau. They can lead you either to heaven or hell. How does that work? Nigrahita. We have to break these two things apart. Nigrahita swargaya. Let's connect those two words. Nigrahita, when your senses are controlled, swargaya, they can lead you to heaven. On the other hand, visrishtani, if your senses are visrishta, they're let loose, they're let free, they're unrestrained, then what? Narakaya, they can drag you down to hell. So, more modern metaphor, you don't ride horses much. I bet you drive a car regularly. And what we're talking about is a steering wheel. Wherever you turn that wheel, the car follows. You turn that wheel left, the car goes left. You turn that wheel right, the car goes right. That steering wheel represents your attention. Step one. Wherever is your attention in life, your activities will follow, just like with the steering wheel. Pretty obvious, and he's going to make that eminently clear as we continue. He says, Indriyanam prasangena, Indriyanam prasang, dosham rachatya samshayam, dosham rachatya samniyam yatutan yeva, sanniyam yatutan, tata siddhyam avapnute, tata siddhyam avapnute. Indriyanam prasangena, due to the prasanga, due to the contact, a little technical, due to the contact indriyanam, due to the contact of your senses with various objects, like in the mall, like when you're sitting in front of the TV watching the commercials. So due to the contact of your senses with various objects, and that's our first step here. Excuse me a moment. Indriyanam prasangena, due to the contact of your senses with various objects of the world, then what? Dosham rachati. Rachati. One goes where? Dosham, to defect, to sin. When your sense organs contact something, it draws you to sin. And he says, asamshayam, without doubt, certainly, all the time. And just to give the kind of the most obvious example, when after dinner, you go to a friend's house for dinner. After dinner, they put these really nice sweets out on the table. And just last week, your doctor warned you about your weight, about sweets, and about... most Indian sweets also have a fair amount of ghee. And your doctor read you the Riot Act about fat and sugar, which is what? Sweets and ghee. And what's on the table? You bet. It's all there. And it's your favorite kind of sweet. And your doctor has just told you that if you continue to eat sweets, you're going to do harm to your health. And you see that sweet right in front of you, and what happens? Amazing. And what's amazing about it is you know that sweet is harmful to your health. Your doctor has just told you so, days before. And in spite of that, it magically disappears in your mouth. How is that? This is why the Vyadha says, asamshayam, without doubt, you're going to get into trouble. How? Indriyanam prasangena, as soon as you see that sweet. So then what should you do? He says, samniyamya tutani eva. Samniyamya tani, by restraining those senses. Tata siddhim avapnute. Then you can reach perfection, tataha, as a result. Siddhim, perfection, avapnute, you will achieve. What is perfection here? If you see those sweets, maybe excuse yourself from the table if you need to. You just excuse me, you go sit in the living room. I'm not joking. This is a matter of personal discipline. If you can sit and look at those sweets without putting them in your mouth, no problem. Sit there. But if you know we'd used the word before, vulnerable to falling down this slippery slope. If you know your self-discipline is not sufficient to avoid eating those sweets, and your doctor has warned you it's going to make you sick, it's going to hurt your health, and if you know you're not able to restrain yourself, what should you do? Seriously. You excuse yourself and you get up from the table. Or you can ask your host, please, can you remove those from the table? You can explain. What's wrong with that? You can say, my doctor has just told me that blah, 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 blah. And you can say, can you please take those away? Any harm in saying that? None. In fact, your host will honor and respect your wishes, because does your host want to kill you by feeding you all of the sugar and ghee? Or does your host want you to live a long, healthy life? So this, what we're talking about now, is a matter of self-discipline. This is a topic that maybe we don't talk about enough in these classes. It's crucial for us to live a healthy, productive life. And at two levels. Not only is it necessary, not only is self-discipline necessary for leading a spiritual life, even if you want to lead a normal, materialistic life, if you're not disciplined, if you're in a hospital because you're getting a quadruple bypass operation because you ate too many of those laddus or whatever they are, then your lack of self-discipline is self-defeating, not only at a spiritual level, but even at a worldly level. This slippery slope not only prevents you from spiritual growth, this slippery slope even prevents you from a conventionally comfortable, happy life. Self-discipline is crucial. And the choice is yours. So this current topic we need to unfold just a little bit. Self-discipline in this context is a matter of making good choices. Consistently making good choices. If you consistently choose the right foods, you're going to be much healthier. If you consistently choose to get some exercise, you're going to be healthier. You can make that choice. You must make that choice. How about if you choose, just to examine some other places where there might be some lack self-discipline. We've talked about television several times. Why should you sit down during that? If that commercial comes on, why leave it on? Do you happen to have one of these in front of your TV? Have you ever discovered that there's a mute button? Yeah, turn that thing off. Why should you listen to all these commercials? Why should you subject yourself to all this propaganda and programming? Seriously. Why subject yourself? You have that remote control. As a minimum, muted. You don't need to hear all of that stuff. This is exercising your you can choose properly, a matter of discipline. How about choosing forms of entertainment? If you're watching shows on TV, what kind of shows are you watching? You know, there's some wonderful programming on TV. There's also a lot of trash. So what do you choose? If you consistently choose properly, you're leading your life in the right direction. If you consistently choose the trash, aren't you pulling down your life? I'm sorry to make such a big deal of this. But if you consistently choose to watch all kinds of unwholesome stuff, it's going to affect you. It will affect you. It cannot but affect you, just like the food. It's going to affect you. How about the main topic of this chapter is choice over what we're talking about materialism. In the last class, we'll come back to that right now. Exercising choice over what you purchase. How is that? If you choose to purchase what you need, no problem. If you choose to purchase more than what you need, isn't that the first step? Coming down our slippery slope. If you consistently choose to purchase only what you need, you don't have to worry about anything. If you consistently choose to purchase more than what you need, if you overindulge by satisfying your many wants and desires, you are making choices which are dragging you down that slippery slope. You can make the right choices. And finally, a reference to 2 verses ago, who do you choose your friends as well? So if you choose friends who elevate you, satsanga, if you choose that kind of friend, how will that affect you? Pretty obvious. And if you choose some other kinds of friends, here's an observation. Those of you who have raised children, I bet you have really, really stressed to your children about avoiding a certain kind of people and only associating with the good kids. I'm sure all of you who have raised children have really stressed that to your kids. Pardon me for challenging you a little bit. Are you as careful with your friends as you want your children to be with their friends? You might be. I hope you are. But if you're not, what is the consequence? Just as you know that the bad consequences of your children associating with the wrong kind of people, it's equally true for an adult as it is for a teenager or anyone. So we must choose. So this concludes this particular verse, talking about making good choices, being disciplined, and consistently making choices which are life-affirming, which lead us on the path of Dharma, which lead to growth and health, and avoiding choices which are harmful to ourselves and others, avoiding especially the choice of overindulgence, which can drag us down that slippery slope. Now, we come to that metaphor of the horse and chariot, and this is in the longer Trishtub meter. It has 11 syllables and a quarter. Ratha shariram purushasya drishtam. Ratha shariram purushasya atma hi niyantendriyan yahurashvam. Atma niyantendriyan yahurashvam. Thara pramatta kushali sadashwar. Thara pramatta kushali sadashwar. Danta sukham yatirati vadhira. Dantai sukham yatirati vadhira. There's a typo in that last line. Dantaihi, not dantaihi. Dantaihi means with teeth. Danta is tooth. Danta is controlled. We'll come to that word in a few minutes. Okay, so here's our metaphor. We've already alluded to it. Rataha shariram purushasya. Purushasya, for a person. Rataha, the chariot, is shariram drishtam, is understood to represent the body. So this is a metaphor that we find. This metaphor has its origin in the Katha Upanishad, and this metaphor is also alluded to in the Bhagavad Gita, and here we have a short version of it. So the metaphor is your body is represented by the chariot. Rataha shariram purushasya. And then who is the charioteer? The charioteer is the one making the decisions, making sure the chariot goes the right way. So charioteer here is niyanta. You have to break the words apart. Niyanta means the one who controls. Niyanta, the charioteer, the one who controls, represents what in the metaphor? The word used is Atma, but here Atma really means buddhi, intellect. Be ready for that. There are many, many places in texts where the word Atma doesn't mean Satchidananda, but the word Atma means mind or intellect. Here it means intellect. So, Ratha Shariram, the chariot, represents your body, and Niyanta, the charioteer, represents your mind. And then what? Indriyani, your senses are represented by Ashwan, the horses. Ahuhu, they say that Ashwan, the horses, represent your indriyas, your senses. So here's a basic metaphor. The chariot is your body, the charioteer is your intellect, and the horses represent your senses. Notice in this metaphor, wherever the horses go, the body follows, along with the charioteer. Horses represent your senses. Look at it. It's the very first step in our slippery slope. This was the point. In these 8 steps of the slippery slope, the place where restraint is effective is only at the beginning. As we said, once you're tumbling down the slippery slope, it's too late. So here this metaphor is showing how the horses need to be restrained. And he continues the metaphor. Apramattaha, and you have to connect it with the second line, rati. Rati means charioteer. Rati, see rati, eva, 2 words together. So, apramattaha rati, a vigilant charioteer. Apramattaha, vigilant. A vigilant charioteer who is kushali, who is skillful. A skillful and vigilant charioteer. Sukham yati, in the second line, the skillful charioteer, sukham yati, reaches happiness, means reaches their goal. A skillful charioteer reaches their goal when, if they have taihi sadashwaihi dantaihi. If that charioteer is accompanied by taihi, by those. By what? Sad ashwaihi, by good horses. Accompanied by good horses. What do you mean by good horses? Dantaihi, controlled horses. When the horses are controlled, the charioteer reaches the destination. If the horses are not controlled, you'll never reach the destination. In the same way, if your senses are restrained, this is our topic. When your senses are restrained, you will sukham yati, reach happiness in life. If your senses are not restrained, you will find yourself tumbling down a slippery slope. So just as it is for the rati, for the charioteer, eva, in the same way it is true for the dhiraha, for a wise person. A wise person will control his senses, leading us to the last verse of the chapter. Indriyanam prasrishtanam, Indriyanam prasrishtanam, Hayanam iva vartmasu, Hayanam iva Dhritim kurvita saratye, Dhritim kurvita sarat, Dhrityatani jayet dhruvam, Dhrityatani jayet dhruvam. Indriyanam prasrishtanam hayanam. Hayanam eva vartmasu. Hayanam eva, just like for horses, vartmasu, going down the road. The horses who, in the same way for horses which are prasrishta, if they are free and uncontrolled, in the same way, for the indriyas, indriyanam. If horses are uncontrolled going down the road, you're never going to reach your destination. In the same way, if there is a lack of discipline and proper decision-making in your life, which means if you're not controlling your senses means what? Not being disciplined and not making good choices. That's what we're talking about. If you fail to make good choices, if you fail to be self-disciplined, it's like having horses which are running around. Therefore, saratye dhritim kurvita, when the charioteer kurvita dhritim exercises control, restraint. If the charioteer stays in control of their horses, dhritya tani jayet, with that restraint, dhritya, with that restraint, tani, those horses, jayet, are under control. And the metaphor is, just as the horses can be brought under control, in the same way your senses can be brought under control. Again, what does it mean for your senses to be controlled? And the last word, dhruvam, certainly. But last comment here. This whole last half of the chapter is about controlling your senses. What is controlling your senses? You've seen the horses with these blinders on? That may work for a horse, it's not going to work for you and me. So that's not what we mean by controlling the senses. What do we mean by controlling the senses? We've discussed that in the last couple of verses. Making proper decisions consistently. Consistently. Vigilance. You make good decisions most of the time, I've no doubt. But we're all capable of making those occasional mistakes which have some pretty big consequences. That's where discipline comes in. Discipline and vigilance. The word that we saw in the previous verse was apramattaha. One who is always vigilant. One who is never casual in making decisions and choices. If you are vigilant, if you are disciplined in your choices in life, you build a wonderful life at a material level and a wonderful life at a spiritual level. The key then is good decision making and vigilance to consistently make those good decisions. That brings us to the end of this chapter. When we meet next time, the next chapter is going to be pure Vedanta. Pretty powerful, heavy Vedanta. We'll see that in our next class. The slides will be on our website. A couple of closing announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we usually have the advanced meditation on the first Sunday of each month. Tomorrow we will not have an advanced meditation or satsang. Usually we have at 6:15. As you know, we have the residential camp at Arsha Vidya in Saylorsburg. I'll be leaving for the camp tomorrow. You're all welcome. Even if you come for part of the camp or just come visit for a day, you're all welcome. That camp will start tomorrow evening. Therefore, we will not have any program here tomorrow. The library will be open after class, and we'll conclude. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayah Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.